Are we on? There you go. All right, thanks. Hey, so I want to say thank you to a couple people here that are doing some things tonight. First of all, Tara's over here painting for us, so yay! All right, and here's the thing. The reason I'm pointing this out is because last time we got together, we had Bobby over there, and she was doing the top part, and towards the end of the service, people were getting nervous because they're like, wait, she hasn't finished yet. So this is an ongoing thing. So we're going to be doing this for the next 7 or 8 weeks here, and by the time we're done, all of the 10 artists who sort of brought our windows to us will also have contributed to this. So we'll have 10 windows, and we'll have one piece that's put together by all 10 of the artists that you will hear more about, that we're going to be doing a gallery probably in Venice on Abbot Kinney on Good Friday. So we're going to tell you more about that, but there's going to be a gallery that we're going to set up from all these things. It's going to be a great way to reach out to the community. So first of all, thank you to Tara. And then secondly, I don't know if you've seen back in the back or not, but everyone turn around and just look in the back. There's like a whole bunch of people back in the back. And tonight, because we're sort of low in attendance, there's as many of them as there are right here. So anyway, these are folks who are doing some videotaping for us. We're working on a process to get this whole thing streamed and online and all that sort of thing. But tonight in particular, there are going to be some people who are going to be watching in after we do this. We're going to be sending them a link to this. And these are people who have supported Resonate who are outside of Los Angeles, people that we have gathered together over the course of the last year and asked to be a part of this and who have given their finances to be a part of this. And we're going to be sending this to them. So I thought tonight it would be good for all of us to say thank you to them. So kind of turn around and wave at the camera and say thank you to all these folks who have been a part of this. We're going to jump into something called 40K in 40 days with some other people outside of Resonate to help us fund what we're doing over the course of 2015. So those people are going to be tapping into what we're doing tonight as well. So lots of stuff going on. Glad to have you guys here. Missed you guys last week when we were all Super Bowling or whatever that is that you call that people do. But we're glad to have you back tonight. And I want to tell you, tonight is a counterintuitive night. As I thought about what we're going to talk about tonight, the best way I could describe it is it's counterintuitive. Jesus says, be careful not to do your acts of righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your heavenly Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So I have a friend who is now actually a college professor, but for a long time before he did that, he worked in a music store and he sold high-end musical instruments. And he said, people would come in and he would talk to them, and then they would look at stuff, and then they'd start wrestling with the decision. And then there was always that moment when he could see it was like they were on the verge of one way or the other, making a purchase or not. And he said he found this technique that he started to use, and he said it was amazing how well it worked. So people would be sitting or standing, whatever, they're wrestling with the idea of buying this thing, whatever it is. They'd say, oh, this is a great guitar, but like it's just more expensive really than I can afford. Or somebody else would say, maybe it's just not the time for me right now to be buying a musical instrument, or this piano is great, but I don't know if it's going to fit into my house. And what he said is, every time when people would say these kinds of things, he would look him in the eye and he would say, that's exactly why you should do it. And he said it was hysterical. Every time people would go, oh. It's like they'd stop for a minute, they'd think, they'd back up. Right, exactly. And he said it worked an incredible number of times. People would change their minds because he'd say, that's exactly why you should do it. Now, why does that work? Because it's counterintuitive, right? Anything that's counterintuitive makes us stop to rethink our position or stop to think about it again. So a counterintuitive thing is something that's actually really important. It's part of what we talked about at the very beginning of this series on the Sermon on the Mount. When we said Jesus often is the provocator, right? The one who provokes us into thinking differently about things. And that's what a counterintuitive thing is all about. So tonight's topic, giving, is counterintuitive. I mean, why would we work really hard and then simply hand off the fruits of our labor? Or why would I cause more stress in my life when I could just relax? I could be much more secure by holding on to more of my own money that I've made. And if I'm struggling to balance my own budget, I simply cannot afford to give away 10%, which is sort of the traditional tithe. I simply cannot afford to give away 10% of my income. And I would suggest my answer to any of those things tonight is, that's exactly why you should do it. And it's not a trick, you'll see. Although, if it works for you, that's okay, but it's not. It's not a trick. The key point of this passage that we're looking at tonight, that we just read from the Sermon on the Mount, is that giving, counterintuitively, is not about external things, it's about internal things. Jesus says that giving is not primarily about what it does for other people. In other words, we don't give because we should, and honestly, we don't give because God needs us to give. He could get along fine without us. Giving, according to this passage, what Jesus is focusing on here, is about what it does for you. It's about what's happening between you and God when you give. That's what this passage is talking about. So what is happening when you give? This is an important topic. So we're going to take tonight and we're going to use this passage as a jumping off point to talk about that. What is happening when we give? You might be surprised to know that in the Bible, the word believe is used 272 times in the New Testament. The word pray is used 371 times. The word love is used 714 times. The word give is used 2,162 times. It might also surprise you to know that Jesus had more to say about money than he did about heaven and hell combined. Why? Because money makes a bid for our heart in a way that nothing else does. So tonight, let's look at the counterintuitive side of money, giving it away. The first thing that's happening inside of us when we give is that giving frees us from fear. Now, in a few weeks, we'll go in depth into a passage in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus speaks to fear. We're going to go in depth on this, but just listen to it for a moment here in the context of what we're talking about. Jesus says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. What you eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or stow away in barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith?" And that, I love the ending of that because it's literally one word. What he says to them, "You little faiths." What is he saying here? He's trying to describe something that is real. He's trying to describe a reality that we actually live in, whether we recognize it or not. So I would call it a Trinitarian reality. And the reality is this: we live in a reality where there is enough. And giving says that we know that to be true. It's an act of faith. When we give, we are saying to God, "I believe that there is enough. I believe that you have your eye on me, and I believe that you will continue to give me enough." So when we give, it's a counterintuitive act that puts our faith into action and goes against the idea of being fearful about what we have or don't have. In the Old Testament, the prophet Malachi said, "Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Test me in this," he says the Lord. "See if I won't throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing you won't have room for it." It's interesting, this passage where God says, "Test me." It's like he's saying, "I dare you to try this." And we're going to talk about this later, but I don't believe that what it means is, you give some money to God and all of a sudden you get a bunch of money back. I don't think that's what he's talking about. It's a different thing. We'll talk about that later. But it's like God says, "I dare you." He says, "Test me in this. See what happens." There's a great story about a millionaire who was at a church meeting where the topic was giving, and feeling very proud of himself, the man stood up and he said, Not too many years ago, I sat in this church and I had only one coin to my name, but I believed what God said about giving. So I dropped that one coin into the basket. I put everything I had into the basket that day. I knew I had to give God all or nothing, and God is faithful, and today I'm a millionaire. And he sat down, and there was sort of an awkward silence in the room, as there would be if someone did something like that, until a little old woman sitting next to him said, just loudly for everyone else to hear, I dare you to do it again. Aha. See, here's the thing. Again, counterintuitively, I believe that the more we have, the harder it becomes to give. We tend to think of it in the other way, but I don't think that's true. Giving is just as much an act of faith for someone who has a lot as it is for someone who has little. See, I think we think of it this way. We say to God, when I have enough, I'll give. And God says, well, when you give, you'll have enough. And again, not because of some weird, prosperity gospel thing, not because of some weird quid pro quo where we give and God gives back, but because it's just how it works. See, giving is an act of faith on our part that is part of a lifestyle of trusting God. And a lifestyle of trusting God, of walking with Him, of obeying Him, creates the kind of steadiness and habit patterns that result in us becoming the kinds of people who manage our resources well. It's just part of living the kingdom life. So here's something I think is really important in our culture. I believe that giving is a key spiritual discipline because we live in such a materialistic culture. We have grown up, if you grew up in the church, hearing a lot about, we need to pray, we need to read our Bible, and all that's important. But I actually think the two most important spiritual practices for people who are following the way of Jesus in our culture may be giving and rest. Not to denigrate the scriptures and prayer and all of that, but we don't think of them in that context. But if we think about the weight and the power of materialism that we live under all of the time, and that drive that all of us have because everyone else is going after more, giving is such a counterintuitive practice. In our culture, I believe it to be one of the most important spiritual practices of people who are followers of Christ. Again, it's a counterintuitive, countercultural act of faith that's foundational in creating a lifestyle of trust that frees us from the fear that bid that money makes for our heart creates. So that's the first idea, the first thing that's happening in us. Why is Jesus saying you should do this? Well, the first thing is because he's saying, look, it will free you. Secondly, giving restores balance in our lives. There's a lot of talk in our world, and we all know this because we live it, about the lack of margin in our lives, right? We always feel like, we're pushed to the edge in terms of the demand of our time. And then, probably if you're like me, every 2 weeks or whatever it is, you do your bills, you look at it, you're on the computer, whatever you're doing, and you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm just always right on the edge. Why can't I get off the edge? There's a fascinating piece of the story of ancient Israel that really speaks to this issue. It's really interesting. After the Israelites have come out of slavery into Egypt, and as they prepare to enter into the promised land, God gives them some guidelines in the book of Leviticus for the development of a kingdom living kind of society. He gives them a whole bunch of guidelines and saying, this is the kind of people and culture that I want you to create. And in chapter 19 of Leviticus, there's this small little passage. I think it has tremendous value for us today. In Leviticus 19, verses 9 and 10, God says to these people, who will primarily be farmers in the new society they're building, he says this, when you reap the harvest of your land, so this is like how they make their money, right? When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. In other words, things that are left behind, kind of coming through a second time, that's the gleanings. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the alien. And he says, I am the Lord your God. So he puts kind of a mark on the end of that statement. What's he doing? He's creating margin. He's saying to the people, don't push it to the edge. Leave yourself some room so that when needs come up, you can be part of helping to meet those needs. By planning for it, by leaving space for it, you have room, and he says this is how you can create resources to help. Don't push it to the margins. Leave some space. Now, how do we do that? One of the best ways to do this in our situation that I've discovered, at least in my own life, is to live off of what I call the 10-10-80 plan. You might have heard of this before, right? It's very simple. We give 10%, we save 10%, we spend 80%. And what does that do? It creates balance in our lives that gives us margin. Now, I know that some of us look at that and we go, are you kidding? I mean, that's my first reaction the first time I heard it. I was like, eh. And I remember when Dee and I started to live like this. It was soon after we were married. I was in graduate school at the time. And I remember I was wrestling with this idea. And I remember, as I was thinking through it, really wrestling through it, I actually went to somebody and I said, okay, well, here's a question. Does that mean I should give 10% off of my net income or off of my gross income? And the person looked at me and he said, well, it depends on if you want to be blessed, net or gross. Right. Exactly. So we sat down, we redid our budget, and we have never looked back since. Certainly it's been challenging. Listen, I'm a pastor, I'm a church planter, my wife is a teacher, we're not rolling in money, but this little concept has been, listen to this is really true. This has been one of the most health-producing decisions we've ever made as a family. So I was thinking about that, and I thought, well, okay, let me give you some examples. We were able to pick up and move to Amsterdam as missionaries because we had been living on this kind of a plan. We were able to start a church in the New York City area because we were living on this kind of a plan. We had flexibility in our lives and our finances. We were able to put our kids through school because we were living on this kind of a plan. And we've been able to give even to this church plant in ways that we never would have been able to because we've lived on this plan. It's given us margin. It's created balance. And here's the thing that you may not believe, but it's really true. I'm an extroverted guy. I'm an action-oriented person. I'm not the kind of guy when I think about spiritual disciplines, and I think about sitting down and reading my Bible for an hour, praying for 30 minutes. Those kinds of things are actually quite hard for me to do because I just can't sit still, right? So some spiritual disciplines for me are really hard. This is a spiritual habit that has produced great joy. When I look at this, I don't go, oh, this is really hard. I go, this has actually produced great joy for us in our household. And my testimony is, and I'm sure others in here would say the same thing, in 30 years of marriage, I've never once regretted us living off of this plan. So, if you've never done anything like this, here's a suggestion on how to start the process. I would suggest you take a night this week, get out a pencil, get a notepad, get your computer out, open QuickBooks, whatever it is you do, get your bills, get everything you need around you. And do you guys, if you have that moment like that happens to me every couple of weeks, it's like, oh, got to go do the bills, right? And I put everything around me and I open the computer and I get ready to start. But here's something that's counterintuitive that you should do. As you do this week, as you start thinking about your own budget, do all that, get everything prepared, then put a candle in there and light a candle. And think about what you're doing as a holy moment. And then sit down with that candle lit, burning to help you remember why you're doing it, and create a budget for yourself. And you may not be able to start here. You may have to edge your way up to it. But create a budget so that you can get to this, and I guarantee you, you will not regret it. Again, it's been one of the most health-producing things that we've ever done in our family's life. And remember, we give the first 10% because it's the leverage point that creates balance in the rest of our budget. It's the statement that says that at the beginning, God, all of this is yours. And that balance in our budget, which creates a balance in our time, ends up helping to create balance in our lives. You see how that flows? We spend an enormous amount of time managing our stuff. So if we can balance that budget, then we will see time begin to shift a little bit, and then we will begin to see our actions begin to follow. All of this is about walking in the way of Jesus. So, those are two things that are happening in our souls when we give. We're being freed from fear. We're restoring balance in our lives. And then there's one more thing that's so important that the only way I could think of it is to say, describe it this way. When we give, we anchor our faith. Here's what I mean by that. Because it may sound like kind of a grandiose statement. I want to unpack it a little bit, this idea to show you why I believe this is true and why it's so important. Giving brings us face to face with two key spiritual principles that anchor not just our financial lives, but all of our lives. And the two principles are this. First of all, God is the owner of everything. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God created everything, so God is the owner of everything. The beach, the sand, the sky, the wind, the rain, the hills, the trees, the concrete, the highways. God owns the car that you came in here this evening. God owns the seats that you're sitting on. God owns the money that is in your wallet tonight. He owns every plant, every rock, every animal, every person, everything. God owns everything. Psalm 24:1 says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Except what you want to put, no. See, it doesn't say that. Now, one practical implication of this principle in our financial lives is that because God is the owner, He is also the source. That means that ultimately, we look to Him for our resources and nowhere else. So what that means is your company is really not the source of your income. Your boss is not the one who ultimately decides how much you'll receive. What you have in the bank has nothing to do with your actual net worth. All of that can change in a day. The scriptures teach us that the ultimate source of all that we have is God. So that is a key spiritual principle that goes way beyond finances. And once we get into our heads the idea that God is the owner, the source, it becomes easier for us to understand a second spiritual principle that I think anchors our faith, and that is our roles. So if God is the owner, what are we? Well, if you look back at the job description, sort of the job profile that God gave to Adam and Eve, in Genesis 1:28 says this, God blessed them. So after He set them in the garden and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves on the ground. And then in Genesis 2 it says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and what? Take care of it. So our job is to be the managers. God is the owner, we are the managers. That's our job. And again, it's an anchor point for our faith. We've been put here to care for God's good creation. God has sort of made us junior partners in the process. We get to co-create with Him all kinds of good things in our world as we manage it and care for our world and steward all that He has given to us. But see, one of our problems is that we forget what we're created for. We get it mixed up. One author I read put it like this. God intended originally at creation for us to rule over things, but what happened? We got it mixed up and reversed it. Now things rule over us. We're possessed by our possessions. God says it's foolish to make your number one goal in life simply the acquisition of things. I'm just loaning them to you for a short time. You're going to be here 60, 70, 80, 90 years. I'll loan them to you. You can manage them. You can use them. You can enjoy them. But when you're done, you're going to come into eternity, and I'm just going to loan them to somebody else. Everything's on loan. Yeah, you've heard the old saying, you can't take it with you. And Daryl mentioned it just a minute ago, I love to tell the story of a friend of mine who found out just how real and true that saying is. So this guy's a pastor, and one day he got asked to come and speak at a church in another city. And it was a more traditional church, and he showed up kind of like this, and so when he got there, he didn't realize it, so he didn't have a suit, and everybody in that place, they had a suit. So one of the church members asked him what size he was and said, don't worry, I'm going to bring a suit for you to the service, so you're all covered. So this is a true story. So sure enough, they brought him a suit, he got the suit, he got up to speak, but he had a problem. He was used to putting his hands in his pockets when he spoke, and when he tried to do that, he couldn't He went through the entire message very uncomfortable because like he couldn't put his hands in the pockets because there were no pockets. And so after the service, he goes to the guy, this again, true story, he goes to the guy who had brought him the suit and said, why didn't the suit have any pockets? And the guy goes, well, I'm the local undertaker, and the people who use my suits usually don't need pockets. So you really can't take it with you. All right, so let's review these ideas here. Giving frees us from fear. Counterintuitively, when we relax about our money, we release the grip that it has on us. So when we give, it frees us from fear. Secondly, giving creates balance. Counterintuitively, when we give, we create margin in our lives by setting into place a structure for our finances that frees us to do way more than we think we can. And then finally, giving anchors our faith. It reminds us of two primary spiritual principles that are overarching in our lives. God is the owner, and we are the managers. Now, these are the kinds of things that are going on in our souls that Jesus referred to in this passage tonight. The reason he was talking about the idea that, this is not about externals, it's about internals, is because things happen in us when we give. And so I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, okay, over the next few weeks, as we think about giving towards this brand new community that God is birthing, Resonate. We've been meeting this community gatherers, we've been talking about, what we're going to do in the next year and giving and all that sort of thing. And I began to think about, so how am I going to give next year? Not just like what does it mean to give, but how am I going to give? And here's the word that came coming back to me, and this was it. The Bible tells us, we're to give willingly, we're to give thankfully, we're going to give personally, we need to give faithfully. We could walk through all that. But as I thought about it, the word that kept popping into my head for my own giving this year is this: I'm giving expectantly. 2 Corinthians 9:6 says, whoever sows generously will reap generously. And there's a promise there. Now, although I don't think it's necessarily related to my financial success, I do not believe that if I give generously, then God has to outgive me in my bank account. But I do think that promise is related to the fruit of what we will see from God when we give. When we give generously, we reap generously. So as I give to Resonate in 2015, here are some things that I'm expectant about. I'm expectant that as we engage in these quarterly arts outreaches, the first of which, again, will be on Good Friday. You're going to be hearing about this gallery that we're creating. I'm expecting that we'll connect with people who do not normally show up to church. I'm expecting that some of those people will get to know us and we'll begin to get a relationship with them. I'm expecting to see new people become followers of the way of Jesus because of these quarterly events. I'm expecting us to make a dent in this 95% statistic of people who have yet to meet Jesus in our community. I'm expecting that to take place this year as I give. I'm expecting that as we engage in these conversation evenings and the learning labs that follow from them, all of us will go deeper into our practice of the way of Jesus. I'm expecting to see many of us change as a result of those practices that we work on together. I'm expecting children to be raised out of extreme poverty and into hope through this partnership in Ecuador that we have, where we're planting this church with Compassion International. I'm expecting to see kids who are hungry get fed, people who need medical care be healed, young moms taught the basics of how to care for their children. I saw it happening, and I can't wait to see it happen again this year because of what we're doing. And I'm expecting to hear stories of transformation in the lives of people in this very room. In the community gatherings, as we would talk about this, I said to you several times, we think about a church plan, and we think about, all the people we want to reach, and all that sort of thing. We think about the transformation that's going to occur in the lives of people who get to meet Jesus through the context of a church plan. Because church plants reach people 6 to 8 times faster than normal churches. But the stories of transformation are much bigger and wider than that. What I have seen happen in our lives, my life, in our experiences, our family, as we've done this in the past, is that church planting is a transformational process for the people who are doing it together. It changes you. When you engage in something like this, So I'm expecting and I'm looking forward to hearing stories about how God has changed and moved in our hearts as a result of this work that we're doing together. So now, it's your turn. We're gonna do a little experiment here in faith as we close, in a counterintuitive way. we're gonna think about what we expect God to do in faith in this year that we've just entered into. So here's what we're going to do. I want you to take out your program and on the place where it says Next Steps. There's a little blank spot there. And I'm going to ask you to take a couple minutes. Let's the band, you guys come on up. I'm going to ask you to take a couple minutes and just do some sort of thinking and pondering and a prayerful, thoughtful moment. And I want you to just write 2 sentences. One of them is this: in your personal life, in my personal life, in 2015, I expect God to, whatever it is. And then, also, at Resonate, in this community in 2015, I expect God to, and then write something that goes along with that. Now, this is sort of working in the context of a sort of prophetic faith. We're saying, God, we believe these things are going to happen. And I know that might seem a little weird, and we're not getting weird, but at the same time, I think if we speak things out in faith, it means something. So you might think to yourself, well, I really don't have that kind of faith. I really don't know if I can write down stuff about me next year or stuff about the church next year. And here's my answer to you: that's exactly why you should do it. So take just a minute and write. And then what we're going to do is we'll see how this works. It's always a little experiment when we do this stuff. We're going to have you stand. We're going to sing, and then we're going to give a couple of you a chance just to sort of read what you wrote as part of our closing time in worship tonight. So take a couple minutes, write, and then Josh, you can have us stand and sing, and then we'll do a moment of letting people stand up and speak out. they came together, some people had a psalm, some people had a song, some people had a word, that kind of thing. Part of the early church gatherings were people to encourage one another through what was going on in their lives. And I know our pattern of church is different. It's sort of the upfront kind of thing. But so tonight you get a chance to encourage one another. And I'm doing all this to give somebody the courage who says, I'm going to go first and read my thing. So anybody who wrote something, willing to read their 2 sentences for us tonight? Anybody? Who would like to be second? All right, hold on. All right, read it out. Yeah, read it out so they can all hear it.
So the 2 things. So in 2015, I expect God to get me back into the entertainment industry. And in Resonate Community 2015, I expect God to double the members of the church.
Excellent. Thank you. Anybody else who's willing to share what you wrote? Hang on. Anybody else? It's actually really a lot of fun. Okay, hold on. Michael. There you go. Go ahead.
Well, in my personal life, I expect God to bless me with a wife, woman friend, and a career I enjoy. And at Resonate, I expect God to expand and grow the fellowship and provide what's necessary for the community.
Thank you. There you go. All right. One more, 2 more, maybe if we can squeeze it out of the crowd. This is really good for you. Anybody else? What's that? I didn't write one down because I was waiting for you to write one down. I will later, I promise. Anybody? Oh, there you go. Astrid. Here we go.
I expect God to heal my family spiritually, and I'm a visitor with my son, but I am going to contribute shutters to your art department and help you out when I can.
Excellent. Thank you. There you go. Yeah, there you go. There you go. All right. Anybody else who's burning to share? Oh, one more. Okay, there you go, Sarah.
I can do my Resonate one. Basically, in 2015, I expect God to bring these people that need us so bad into this community, and we're trying to reach as far as we can, but somehow for Him to bring them in.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. There you go.
Thank you. Sorry.
All right. All right. Thank you, guys. You'll get used to doing this more and more as we gather together, so this is great. All right. Thank you, Josh. There you go.
Sing all the earth. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. What's that? All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. And one last time we sing this verse. All shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath, not ours. So we pour our praise, pour our praise. Not ours. We pour our praise to you,
All right, thank you guys. It's been great to be back together with you tonight. Yeah, really great for us. So God, when we share things from our heart like this, it has power to draw us together as a community, but also because when we speak things out, it's a way of exercising our faith. So would you honor the faith of all of us who have written things down here tonight? Would you give us what we need and help us to be people who give? because that's the kind of people you've called us to be. And so may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you. May God look you full in the face and give you peace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So as you go tonight, there'll be some folks over here if you'd like to be prayed with or prayed for. Lee's over there and some other people if you want to pray with someone tonight. If not, come hang out with us and have healthy snacks, because that's a good thing.